Hey, period one, I totally forgot during our Zoom to push record, so I'm going to do just a quick summary of the problems that we covered today. These are additional problems. They are not part of your assignment at all, but I want to go over these guys, okay? So what we are doing today in Zoom class is we are given a table with the input and output. So I asked you guys to find the domain and range, all right? I'm not going to go over that. That should be fairly simple, especially if you watched the video or if you were in our last Zoom class. But what we want to do is this part, B. This takes a little bit of thinking, but it's not too difficult once you get the idea behind it. So here's the idea. All right, let me erase this. We want to create a rule, or in other words, we want to create an equation so that our equation helps us identify or complete the input-output table. So the way you want to set this up is your equation should always have your output or your dependent variable by itself. So if you notice, I have y by itself because that's my output variable. Then we're going to have the equal sign, and on the other side of the equal sign, we're going to have our independent variable, our input. In this case, it's x. Okay? And what we want to do is a very simple idea, but it can take some thinking. We want to figure out what can I plug in. So in this case, I'm plugging in our x value. So let's start with the first one. If I plug in a 1 here, what should I do to the 1? Should I add, subtract, multiply, or divide so that when I do this math, it gives me 5? So the first thing I like to try is addition, subtraction. So if I plug in 1 here, okay, so let's do that math on top. So I have 1, that's plugged in. What do I have to do to 1 so that whatever I do will equal 5? My first thought is to add 4, okay? So let's try that as a rule. We're going to use adding 4 as our rule. And we're going to check if it works for our input-output table. So if you look, if I plug in 1 and I add 4, that gives me my output, which is 5. That's good. It works here. But we got to make sure it works for all of these. So now I'm going to plug in 2. When I plug in 2, 2 plus 4 is 6. If you notice, I need it to equal 10. So that tells me this rule that I just made up does not work for this function. So I have to figure out a different rule. So let's start back to where we started from, 1 and 5. So what do I have to do with 1 so I could get 5? Well, we know adding and probably common sense says subtraction is not going to work. Okay, so let's go to our next option, multiplication. What should I multiply with 1 so that it equals 5? Well, hopefully that's fairly simple. It's 5, okay? So let's try that rule out. So I'm going to multiply whatever x I plug in. I want to multiply it by 5. Let's see if this rule works. So let's try the first set. If I plug in 1 for x, 1 times 5 is 5. This works. Now let's plug in their next value. 2 for x. 2 times 5 is 10. This works. Let's plug in our next x value. 3 times 5 is 15. So far so good. And last but not least, let's plug in 4. 4 times 5 is 20. This rule works, this equation works for this function. Okay? So that's what we did today in class. I actually went over all of these, but as you can see, all these rules are correct, and I kind of did them in the same way. So using the first set of input-output, okay, how can I add, subtract, multiply, or divide my x value to get my y value? And once you figure that out, test that with all the other x and y pairs. If it works for all of them, then your rule is done. If it does not work for all of them, then we have to try a different rule. Hopefully this helps, and I will see you later.